Ghost of Tsushima is an open-world action game developed by Sucker Punch Studios, creators of the infamous franchise, which I've been a huge fan of since the first game released in 2009. So, as you can imagine, I was extremely excited for this title as soon as I heard about it. The story starts with you taking control of a young samurai named Jin, and watching as his homeland is invaded by Goddamn Mongolian! The story begins with the samurai of Tsushima suffering a disastrous defeat, and all of them but Jin and his uncle Shimura being wiped out, with the latter captured and held prisoner by the deliciously evil Khotun Khan. After a feeble attempt to free your uncle leaves the already half-dead Jin half-dead again, so I guess 3/4 dead? I'm bad at math, but trust me, it's not good. You then begin your journey across a war-torn country to rally an army, save your uncle, and defeat the Mongolian threat. Now, I'll just start off by saying it outright. This game is amazing. I know the fact it's a very by-the-numbers open-world action game with collectibles, citizens yelling for your help constantly, and all that kind of stuff will likely turn some people off. But in my opinion, this isn't an issue. Not every game is going to be Undertale. Frankly, I don't think reinventing the wheel is a requirement for a game to be good, and Ghost doesn't even attempt to try. What it does do is make a damn good wheel that is up there with some of the best open world games of the last 2 generations. So with that being said, let's get into my thoughts on it. On an aesthetic level, this is one of the most beautiful games I have ever seen. Not necessarily from a purely graphical perspective, although it certainly is no slouch in that department either, but the art direction itself. Every area you explore is so rich, vibrant, and colorful. There were so many times I was playing that I had to just stop and stare in awe at the terrain around me. What's even more impressive is areas don't really repeat themselves, save for the Mongol camps, which all do look kinda similar, but understandably so. Sucker Punch knows how pretty the game is too, because they included one of the most comprehensive and fun to use photo modes I've ever seen. As someone who doesn't normally like photo modes all that much, I really had a blast messing around with it, and it's easily the most I've ever used one in a game. When I first heard this game was integrating an immersive HUD, I was skeptical. Call me crazy, but I'm actually not someone who is all that bothered by a very in-your-face HUD. I guess it's just something I've grown used to over my years of gaming. Don't get me wrong though, I 100% get why not everyone feels that way, so I kept an open mind going in. Thankfully, it delivered for the most part. The wind guiding you to your objective, as well as the yellow birds leading you to important landmarks, is integrated so seamlessly you feel like you're just naturally discovering things as you progress through the map. Given how pretty everything looks too, I totally understand why Sucker Punch didn't want to clutter up the screen with life bars and mini-maps, and just wanted to let you enjoy the beautiful landscapes of the game. That being said, I would like an option to add a mini-map personally, as I'm one of those people who obsessively likes to check their map to make sure I'm heading in the right direction. Swiping on the touchpad to make sure I was following the breeze was fine, but again, I'm just weird and like the security of seeing the little map in my corner. At the end of the day though, this is just a quality of life nitpick, so I can't hold it against them too much. I'm also well aware that the majority of players won't agree with me, as immersive HUDs are quite popular. So it just is what it is. The juicy blood and gut stuff is done pretty good as well. Flicking blood off your katana literally never gets old. Watching enemy limbs get sliced off or seeing them vomit up blood from being poisoned is always a treat. And I enjoyed the gore as much as any millennial gamer would. It's not to the ultra realistic level of detail something like Red Dead 2 or The Last of Us 2 is, but I don't think that is really necessary for this style of game. The whole aesthetic is clearly meant as a homage to old school samurai films, and while those movies were indeed violent, they weren't obsessed with the gory details in a way that a lot of Western action films are. So the fast-paced and brutal nature of the in-game violence fits perfectly with what Sucker Punch was going for. Speaking of old school samurai movies, there's an option called Kurosawa mode that is meant to take this love letter to the legendary director to the next level, giving you a beautiful black and white overlay to the game, as well as altering the sound to more closely resemble something from the 50s or early 60s. Unfortunately, as other reviewers like Skill Up have pointed out, this mode is almost a complete waste because why on earth would I want to dull this god tier scenery around me? I could see doing this on a subsequent playthrough of the game perhaps, but there is no way in hell I would ever use this on my initial run through. As cool as it is, the environments in this game are just too damn beautiful to be monochromed out. But the inclusion of the mode itself is really neat, and maybe one day when I'm done picking my jaw up off the floor at the visuals, I'll give it a go. The character models are all pretty good, with Jin and his companions all looking respectably lifelike. Jin himself has all kinds of awesome looking gear and clothing options for those of you who are fashion obsessed. My one complaint in this department is the headgear. There is just too damn much of it. I know having too many options is kind of an odd complaint to have, but when you consider most of these are just headbands you unlock that in a lot of instances look very similar, I think the game could have cut down the amount of them you get by about half and players wouldn't have felt cheated out of anything. The armor you unlock, however, is awesome. There is so many cool looking pieces here that I was hard pressed to pick a favorite. Once you factor in the different armor dyes you unlock as well, the variety grows even larger. So again, if you're someone who likes to have a lot of different outfits to try on, you'll be more than happy with what this game has to offer. The design of the enemies is equally thorough as well. There's a nice progression from the lightly armored novice troops you encounter in the first act to the fully plated elite badasses you'll be fighting by the third. And it's always nice when a game effectively communicates strength scaling through its aesthetic. My biggest complaint with the visual department is the lip syncing. It's just not good, on both English and Japanese audio unfortunately. I could let this slide if it was only English because let's be real here, old school Japanese films and bad lip syncing for English dubs go together like peanut butter and jelly. In fact, it only being a problem with the English audio would almost make the flaw endearing. Unfortunately though, since this is also the case with the Japanese audio, I'm much more inclined to just look at this as bad lip syncing. While I do think this is a drop in the bucket compared to how well everything else is done, it is worth noting because it can be really jarring during some of the game's conversations. Now that we're on the topic of lip syncing though, let's talk about the audio. The music in this game is phenomenal. It fits the setting and vibe of it perfectly to a T, and does a phenomenal job of making the already immersive experience feel even more so. There were so many powerful and emotional sections of the story that were just beautifully accented with this masterful soundtrack. So hats off to Ilyana Shkeri for the wonderful work. The voice acting is great too, but full disclosure, I played through the game with Japanese audio like a true weeb, so I can't really speak much on the English voice acting. I did switch it over a couple times just to listen to it, and I watched a few clips on YouTube as well. And based off of those, it does seem great, but I'll have to give the game a second playthrough with English audio to say for sure. As far as sound design is concerned, this game is quite solid. All the weapons hit with a strong, realistic impact. The death blows and cuts all sound visceral, brutal, and heavy. The environmental effects like thunderstorms and wind all sound perfect, and like everything else do an immensely good job of pulling you further into the world Sucker Punch has created. From the chirping birds to the happy yelping foxes to the galloping of your horse, everything about this world just sounds so alive. Once again, a fantastic job by the developers here, and overall I have to say the presentation of this game is immensely well done, with great audio and some of the most stunning and beautiful visuals I have ever seen.
猛虎は守りに入った。一息に攻めれば明日にも戦は終わろう。
大勢が死にました。
それが戦だ。
守らねばならぬ命です。私があの橋を渡り、毒で殺します。
愚かな策だ。
民を救うための策なのです。
民を恐れさせるだけだ。その道を歩み続ければお前も獣になるぞ。誉れある戦いを忘れるな。
誉れは浜で死にました。ハーンの首を取るために。
怒りに任せよって。
I've seen a few reviews calling the story generic and Jean a boring character. And while on one hand I get the complaints, Jean certainly checks almost every box off for the standard video game hero, and the story is pretty straightforward without taking too many risks, I don't really agree with the detractors. As stated earlier, I don't think a game necessarily needs to reinvent the wheel or do something bold with its story just for the sake of doing something bold. The narrative we got with this game is very good in my opinion, and extremely emotional in a lot of respects despite the paint-by-numbers nature of the tale. You really feel for the characters and their struggles, and while the game certainly takes itself quite seriously, I think given the context of the setting and the bleak reality of the Mongol invasion, it's entirely warranted. Watching Jean confront the reality that the strict honor-based code of the samurai doesn't work so well when engaged with an opponent who could care less about honor was very entertaining for me. After you rescue his uncle in Act 1, this conflict becomes even more profound as the rigid but well-meaning Shimura extremely disapproves of his nephew's actions taken in defense of their country. In a world where honor is so highly regarded and how you win a battle is put on equal footing with actually winning it, the Mongols are a heavy, hard dose of reality to a way of life that has dominated the region for centuries. Regardless of if you agree with Shimura's fanatical adherence to tradition, you understand him, and it genuinely hurts to watch his and Jin's relationship slowly start to fray over the course of the story as Jin comes to rapidly embrace his new identity as the Ghost. The one thing I did find a bit odd is the total lack of player agency over how a lot of this plays out. For example, even if you spend the entire first act strictly adhering to the samurai code and fighting all of your opponents face to face, there is no change in how other NPCs react to what Jin is doing. Given that the story in the Infamous games was so heavily reactive to how you chose to conduct yourself in battles, I was a bit disappointed that there wasn't an option like that here. No matter what you do, Gene's actions will be looked down upon by his uncle, and you will gain a reputation for being effective but ruthless. This is all for the greater good though, as I think the narrative told here is quite compelling, and the final act of the main story particularly will leave you breathless. While it doesn't have the freedom of choice the Infamous games do, I would definitely say the story is overall better than any of those games, and I say that as someone who enjoyed the Infamous series quite a bit. But this game isn't just about Gene and his journey. There are also several allies who play key roles as well. As you journey across Tsushima to recruit your army, you run into a handful of allies who are inclined to help so long as you agree to help them on their own personal crusades as well. Together they are a very likable and memorable group, and I found myself as heavily invested in their respective stories as I was the overarching main narrative. Overall, I think this was a great story that, while nothing new, was extremely competent in its execution. I will certainly remember it fondly, despite it not trying to break the mold in any sort of new way. Okay, now time to talk about my favorite part of this entire game. This is without question one of the most fluid, fun, and engaging combat systems I have ever come across. The swordplay is just marvelous. You have 4 different stances which affects the way Gene fights, and each one is specialized for fighting certain types of enemies. But that doesn't mean you are limited to only using that one style when you combat that enemy. On the contrary, learning to mix and match during combat and what moves work best depending on your positioning is the key here. This isn't a super tactical combat system though in the sense of something like Dark Souls. So if you're looking for complex movesets to memorize and boss battles that will beat you into submission, you may walk away disappointed. The goal of the game is to make you feel like a supremely badass anime swordsman, and it accomplishes that beautifully. That isn't to say there is zero strategy involved. You can't just fling about wildly and hope to accomplish much unless you are playing on easy, but this certainly isn't meant to be an uber punishing combat system. I'm certainly not the kind of gamer who tries to play everything on hard difficulty, but I quickly found myself switching to it here just because the game was feeling a little too easy on normal. Sucker Punch seemed to realize this as about halfway through my playthrough, they released a patch adding a new lethal difficulty where you will be killed in just 1 or 2 hits. I didn't use this myself, as one of my favorite things about the game was how incredibly awesome the combat makes you feel, and I didn't want to change that just for the sake of taking on the biggest challenge I could. For me, hard mode gave the perfect balance where enemies had enough bite to be actually challenging, but you could still tear through them with relative ease once you had the combat system down. On top of the fantastic swordplay, Gene is given a wide variety of tools to aid him in his battles. These tools include kunai throwing knives, which can be used to eviscerate enemy jugulars, a dart gun that shoots poison darts as well as hallucination darts, which will make your enemy attack friend and foe alike, and smoke bombs, which allow you to do the classic ninja disappearing act, putting you in a position to score some easy stealth kills, just to name a few. Speaking of stealth, I have heard complaints that the stealth mechanics in this are very basic. And I suppose that's true from the standpoint of you can't do things like hide an enemy body like in something like Metal Gear Solid. But I still found the system itself extremely fun and took as many opportunities as I could to go full Tenchu stealth assassin on those goddamn Margarin! As if these options alone aren't enough, the game also gives you access to a longbow and shortbow that can fire flaming and explosive arrows once you do the appropriate quests to unlock them. This may actually be my favorite method of fighting by game's end, because plucking off your enemies at a distance with headshots feels so damn nice. But honestly, that's just another drop in the bucket because everything combat related in this game feels so damn nice. Throughout my near 50-hour playthrough of the game, I didn't get tired of combat a single time. I will admit I was concerned at first when I realized there isn't any lock-on mechanism, but as I played the game, I realized that this was actually a good thing, because if there was one, I don't think you'd be able to just cleave through groups of enemies with such pace and energy. Again, the entire point of this system is to make you feel like a complete and total badass, which Ghost accomplishes staggeringly well. As fun as it is though, fighting isn't all you'll be doing throughout Ghost of Tsushima. When you aren't cleaving Mongols to pieces, you will find yourself exploring the world and trying to get your hands on the many collectibles this game has to offer. Here though is where I feel the game underperforms a bit, as it definitely falls into the trap of offering lots of busy work that these games tend to do. Between Mongolian artifacts, banners, and haiku, there are well over 100 collectibles, and sometimes it does feel like a bit too much. I'm not someone who minds seeking out these sort of things, but when the reward for doing so is essentially non-existent, it can feel like a chore that is ultimately for nothing. In the game's defense though, there are plenty of collectibles that do offer some slight gameplay advantages, such as Inari shrines which up your resolve and allow you to pet some adorable foxes, hot springs which raise your maximum health, and Shinto shrines, which unlock powerful charms that help augment Jin's abilities and allow you to set him up for a more specialized role. These charms can also be acquired through side quests and story missions, and there's quite a bit, which really adds a lot of depth to the gameplay. I would like to see a system to organize these a bit better though, like the ability to have pre-made sets of them you can just switch on and off. For example, when you're stealthing through a camp, you're going to have nothing but charms to buff your sneaking and assassination ability. But then when you get spotted, having to go into your inventory and switch all of them over to ones that buff your prowess in melee combat did start to feel like a bit of a chore. The lack of a New Game Plus mode was also a bit disheartening, as I feel like that should just be standard in these type of games nowadays. As soon as I was done playing, I wanted to go back and start over, but I didn't want to labor through getting Jin to God level again, having just spent the last few weeks doing so. I'm fully confident Sucker Punch will do something to alleviate these minor problems though, as just in the short time the game has been out, they have already launched some massive updates with some pretty substantial gameplay tweaks, including new difficulty options as mentioned earlier. And make no mistake about it, this is all quality of life stuff that I would like to see, not things I feel impact the game in a substantially negative way. Aside from a little bit too many collectibles, the gameplay here is absolutely fantastic in every way, and it's definitely the most fun I've had playing a new release this year.
それは本心か。
いいや。
俺が死んでも戦い続けてくれ。
あんたってやつはひどい男だね。そろそろ休む？
まだだ。 今はあと少し共にいてくれ。
Ghost of Tsushima is a phenomenal game, and easily my frontrunner for 2020's Game of the Year thus far. Its rich and beautiful world combined with an addictive combat system that is deep, fun, and memorable easily make it a must-play in my opinion. I loved Sucker Punch's prior games, but this is most assuredly their crowning achievement in my eyes. And with this slated to be the last PS4 exclusive before the next generation, I can't think of a better way to close out what has been a phenomenal generation of games. 9.5 out of 10. The highest score I've ever given to a game for one of my reviews in this channel's brief history. I still feel like Horizon Zero Dawn is the gold standard for this type of game, but Ghost of Tsushima is definitely the new silver standard. With some quality of life tweaks and a new game plus mode, this could easily be a 10 out of 10. But those very minor flaws stop it just short of getting a perfect score for me. As far as channel news is concerned, I want to apologize for going so long between uploads. I had planned to do a review for Last of Us 2 in July, and even had it about 3/4 of the way finished, but the conversation around the game rapidly became so toxic, I figured it was best to wait a little bit before releasing it. Now that the nuclear fallout of the game's release has died down a bit, I will likely finish that up and try to get it out hopefully before September. I also still have my Final Fantasy VII Remake review that I need to finally finish up and release, as well as recorded footage for another game that I am very excited to make a video about. So with all that being said, I doubt I will be going 2 months before the next upload again. And I want to thank everyone who stuck by my channel for their patience despite me not uploading for a little bit. Also, I recently passed the 100 subscriber mark, so I want to double thank everyone who has watched and supported the channel thus far. Lastly, I'd like to hear your thoughts on Ghost in the comments. Do you agree with me that this game is just short of perfection, or do you think I'm massively overrating it? I love to hear other opinions, and I promise as long as you post a thoughtful and respectful comment, I will reply to you. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.